Well, good morning, teachers and families. We are welcoming yet another Kepler teacher today. Isaiah Nixon is a geography teacher here with us, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Joffrey, for having me.
So you're teaching three classes this coming year. All of them are full credit classes, so they're year long. You have the world of maps, you have people and places, and then you have life on Earth. And of course, there are subtitles with each of those courses that unpack them a little bit. But I want to dive into each course, particularly as we go along. But maybe you could sort of introduce us to these classes by answering this question. So the world of maps is a science credit, and the other two courses are humanities credits. So what's the rationale behind that? Why does it work that way?
Sure, and that's a great question. And I think it comes down to the notion of what is geography. And I think a lot of people aren't sure what geography is. When you hear the word geography, you think of countries or state capitals or where things are located. And at the root, that's kind of the very, 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 very basic low-level foundation that it's sure we need to know where things are in the world. But that's not necessarily what the discipline or the subject of geography is about. So what is geography then? Geography is an interdisciplinary task, I should say. We have two big key concepts and ideas: space and place. We look at the world around us and we say, where are things located? Sure, but why are they where they are? What processes have led to their creation, and how do they relate to one another? So geography in and of itself is the relationship between people and space, people and the environment, not necessarily the environment as nature or the outdoors, but physical space. How do we as humans relate to the environment, to a room like this, to a park, to our bedroom, to a school, a room, to an office? And what is the relationships? What are the dynamics between those two entities and that interaction? So when it comes to answering your question about one as being a science, one as being a history, is in geography, we can't just look at science as a separate discipline, and we can't just look at history or economics or philosophy or math as separate entities. We actually have to look at all of them, because it's the culmination, it's the bringing of all of these studies together that actually allow us to understand the relationship between the person or the people and the place. And then it's through that relationship that we actually make meaning, that we actually have these larger conceptual ideas. So that's kind of why we have, at the for my classes, one of them being a cartography mapping class, very, very science oriented in the sense that we are going to be doing computer analysis and we will be making maps and studying maps. But when you're looking at maps, you're dealing with arguments, you're dealing with where people are, why they are there, how do we represent the world, what is the best way to represent the world, how are cultures and economics and ideas and beliefs and worldviews represented through maps. So it kind of brings a lot of different things together. So that's a science course, and the other two are humanities courses, although we will be reading philosophy and we will be doing earth science and a lot of different things all blended together.
Right. You say blended and you say synthesized, and and of course that's the classical way, which puts you right in line with Kepler teachers across the board. But you talk about synthesizing, and I easily see, and I love geography. I easily see how geography just it just fits right into all of this, as any discipline should. But I've been looking forward to asking you this question actually for a little bit. On your teacher profile, you say that geography is the culmination and synthesis of classical education. So yeah, that's a pretty big statement. Sure. Maybe you could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. And when you look at classical education, most people I think would be familiar with the trivium. grammar, logic, rhetoric, and at the backbone of the trivium, once you start getting into high school, is the rhetoric. It's the ability we've learned the grammar, so to speak. We've learned the logic. We've learned the arguments. Now let's speak it. Now let's communicate that via rhetoric. And classical education, as you have noted, does a wonderful job of being interdisciplinary, that there is the pursuit of trying to look at things from a holistic perspective, from this worldview that things are complex, things are connected. And I think geography is unique in that so many of the other subjects, rhetoric, logic, literature, they can be isolated, and it really is up to the teacher, the instructor, to bring in so many of the other aspects of, hey, let's not just look at Dante's Inferno. Let's look at the historical, connotations. Is there some scientific thing in there? And I think that would be up to the teacher. But I think geography in and of itself provides questions and provides almost a lens to do that, to bring it together. And, if you imagine it as kind of being this kind of pot, and geography itself is the pot, and you can fill it with so many different things. Like a classic example I use is here and you had lived in Albuquerque for a while, which is where I am at right now, is Albuquerque, New Mexico. Acequias. Did you ever take a walk along an acequia? The drainage canal.
Actually. Oh,
No?
sure. Yeah. Oh, I hadn't heard that term. You're talking about the paved arroyos?
Not paved, the dirt ones, like along the river that they used to.
Yeah. I never did. I was only there for a year. I missed out on a lot of cool New Mexico stuff.
You missed out. But I love this example of an acequia. An acequia is basically a dirt canal, a ditch, used for irrigation. But an acequia has a huge, deep-rooted cultural significance here in New Mexico. And let's use, in classical education, we love to use primary documents. We want to go to the source. We want to critique. We want to read. We want to memorize. We want to assess, analyze, and then communicate arguments and ideas based off of those. An acequia is a text. It's a cultural text. It's a text where we can come and say, what is the history? Why is this so deeply ingrained in New Mexican culture? Where does that come from? How did it get there, and why? It's a religious text. There are churches that do ceremonies at these acequias. We have saints dedicated to these acequias. It's a scientific text. We can measure the pH. What is irrigation like here in New Mexico? How does the irrigation work? Why do we irrigate in this way? What is all the acequias are gravity, so they all have to, there's nothing actually pushing it. It's diverted from the river. So you have gravity is having to bring it down. How do you create these acequias from an engineering standpoint? You have law. There's water right issues in the Southwest are huge. We, unlike a lot of the other places in the United States, don't have a lot of water here. So there's water rights and legal issues there. Mathematical. I mean, you could go and you could start describing the acequias using mathematics. And this ditch that was once just a ditch is now this robust text that we can pick apart, we can study, we can analyze, and there's conflicts within that. There's a deep history, and I think in geography, what that allows us to do is take objects like that, take texts, if you will, and begin to flesh out and pull apart and really understand and look at the complexities that you would not get to do in, say, a rhetoric class or a literature class. You might be looking at one piece of the puzzle and then trying to pull in as much as we can to try to get out, what can we get out of this one piece from an interdisciplinary perspective. But I feel like geography allows you to place that at the heart and then begin to pull from elsewhere outside of it.
So you almost can't do geography without being interdisciplinary and without pulling in all these other things.
You cannot.
Mm.
There is no way. Geography would cease to be geography at that point.
So whether it's history or anthropology or legal matters or science, like wherever we go, there we are. And so it's always about place, because we are in space. And I actually can't wait to unpack a little bit about space. And but let's take a look at Daniel Fukushan's question here, asking about your cartography course. Does your course cover modern or ancient maps, or both? And I did notice in your course description it does talk quite a bit about computer work.
Sure. And so mapping has a very unique, but I would also say a troubled history. Is when you look at ancient maps, we will, to answer your question, in the course, we will be looking at ancient maps going back to Ptolemy and some of early Aboriginal maps, and early European maps, Asian maps, but we also go into modern times as well. And the history of map making is unique in that people have always tried to place themselves somewhere. This is where I am from. This is where I need to go. This is where I am at now. What is the lay of the land? And maps for many, many years have, and still today, stand as a factual document that people will look at a map and will say, this is where it is. Can't you see? This is true. This is right. But mapping has been a very complex history in that maps also delineate who is in and who is out. Where are you supposed to be? Where are you allowed to be? And where are you not allowed to be? And maps, because they have been like data or statistics or other scientific methods, have determined truth in a lot of different ways, and have used throughout, if you go to ages of exploration, have been literal arguments of saying, we own this place on the map and you do not. And the map says so, and you pass it around and you make maps for a bunch of people. So maps are powerful things. Yeah. So today we have gone away from, the classic image of the guy. Imagine like a painting from the Renaissance, and there's a man with a table strewn out all over the place, and there's instruments and pencils and rulers, and he's measuring. We use computers today to do the same thing, but what that actually allows us to do is we can use satellite imagery, we can use census data, we can plug in and plot all sorts of geographic data, and then use it not only to create a visual map, but to also analyze maps and phenomena, demographics and ideas. And you can map really anything. So long answer to your question. Yes, we will look both at ancient maps to today, look at kind of the history and the progression of how did we get to where we are? Why did we get here? And so on.
Well, and kind of developing from Daniel's question and your subsequent answer, I'm a history enthusiast, and like you start talking about maps and delineations and exclusions. Like one of the areas of study I really enjoy is the conflict between Portugal and Spain over South America, and that's a classic example of how maps were used. And so that's history. For history enthusiasts, I think it's very easy to say, yeah, baby, cartography, maps, all of this. Now, and this is sort of an unfair question, because all of us here at Kepler really are about education for the sake of education itself, for the truth, beauty, and goodness of it. Not thinking just strictly like, what's my job training or what's my practicality. But here goes anyway, unfair question, kind of going off of this modern and ancient thing. So, what if what I'm into is not the conflict between the Spanish and the Portuguese 300 years ago? What if I'm into is business or sociology or whatever my other contemporary interest might be, that where I don't really get sparked by history, or I'm not thinking of a career where history is particularly relevant, why are maps and why is geography? Maybe those are two separate questions, I understand. Why are those important to me?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's always going to be two things that draw people to maps. One is the history. They're beautiful works of art. They have a story behind them. But then the other side is the practicality of them. How many of us have something like this, a smartphone, and you log on to Google Maps? And where do you need to go? You have this interactive mapping platform at the fingertips that my guess is most people use on a daily basis. We use maps still today, even if we're not pulling out the old AAA atlases to try to get us from point A to point B on a road trip. And geography, specifically GIS, computer mapping, is, I forget the exact number, and I haven't looked at it for 2020, but it's generally in the top 5 burgeoning, up and coming, desired fields for the business world. Tech companies need geographers. They need mappers. They need cartographers. City planners need mappers and cartographers. If you're interested in computer science and computer programming, that is GIS. As you're sitting in, as you get more advanced, we probably won't do that in this class because hence cartography 1, as there could be a cartography 2 and 3. But computer programming, you're using Java, you're using Python, you can be using all of these computer programming languages to create and develop software, to be able to take in large data sets of census data and place and coordinates to be able to then map ideas onto a piece of paper. So you really have, Target might want to hire a cartographer to take in their place locations of where their physical store's at. What are the demographics? What's the socioeconomic, class of the area? Where can we do an analysis of where targets are and where targets aren't? And how are we going to be able to best sell our products? So you can go in that direction too with mapping, to go very business oriented, using maps to make your arguments of why you should or should not build in a certain place. Health, COVID, during this crisis, there is a whole field of the geography of health, and more specifically mapping health, of where do people where are people more susceptible to certain diseases? Why are they more susceptible in those locations as opposed to others? What is the relationship between their location and this business or factory or community gathering area? And the list can go on and on and on of how it can be applied. But geography and GIS skills are usually in the top 5 most desired skills for businesses across the country. And it's kind of like it's like the secret position that nobody really knows about.
Right.
But they're all kind of relying on in the workplace.
Yeah, I kind of love how how the map making course is such a technical class, and there is so much computer work. I think that's we as a classical platform, we try to be very conscious of having a STEM, of being a STEM platform, of being a science and math platform, and not having it be something that's secondary or ancillary. But hey, we're called Kepler. We're named after an astronomer, for a reason. So I love that's a part of what we can offer, and we appreciate you doing that. So Scott Postma asks, speaking of your treatment of geography and its relation, he did, after using the wrong "it's," post this comment.
We're not looking at your grammar.
Yeah.
Not today, at least.
Speaking of your treatment of geography and its relation to human history, what influences do land features have on a society or culture, if any? Now, don't answer this question for the remainder of the period, because I could see you taking it. Oh, hey, let's answer this for an hour.
Sure.
But yeah, great question.
Yeah, great question. I'll try to do a short answer to this. There's 2 ways. So short answer is Yes, it does. The more complex answer is yes, but, and. And what I mean by that is there's a tendency to look at features of the land and say, hey, I'll use Albuquerque as an example. That's where I live. We have a river, the Rio Grande River, running through the center of the city. And the river is there because it's in a valley, and the valley was created by two divergent tectonic plates ripping it apart. So you could always be going back and do kind of a regression of saying, well, why is the river there? The river's there because there was divergent tectonic plates that are ripping apart, creating a valley. Well, why is that? Well, this is how tectonic plates work. Why do the people live in Albuquerque? Well, because it's along a river. What is the significant? Why do New Mexico and Texas fight all the time in legal battles? It's because of the river. It's because of the water. The land doesn't have enough water. And we have laws and treaties that allocate X amount of water rights to Texas each year. And if we don't get enough rain, then we can't meet our supply of water for Texas. And then we have political conflict. So the land is influencing us. But we also want to be careful not to fall into environmental determinism, which is a kind of a geographic historical concept of saying that people and places are the way they are because and solely because of the land and where they live. And I think historically you might see notions of environmental determinism in skin color, of people are a certain color of skin solely because they live in this place, or people eat this type of food, or they don't like this people group because they live in this certain place. The land shapes who we are. Our access to water, resources, how we use them, creates cultures, but it's not the sole factor of that. And I think it's a lot more complex than we portray it as usually. Usually it's either the land did this or there's another reason, but it's kind of like this is part of it, and this and this and this and this and this and this, and we bring it all together, and that's what is going to create a culture or a people.
You know, it's one thing to say, you know, environmental determinism, true or false. Well, it's not, it's false, okay, but why is it pernicious?
That's a good question. In the sense that, now, are you wanting to go in the sense of why it can be a dangerous place to be and fall in that? Because I think what it can do is it simplifies, it oversimplifies processes. And this is in geography, we see this trend a lot. When we study people, we study cultures, we study the land, we study, because ultimately we're studying the relationship between them. And environmental determinism and many other, you know, kind of positions that we might just want to settle into can be dangerous because it oversimplifies things. It's a statement that says, I understand everything about you, who you are, where you come from, and why you are the way you are. And that's taking, not only is that prideful, but it's really taking a faulty perspective on the world and who people are. You know, and if, especially from a Christian standpoint, if we look at a human and say, you are the son, you are a son, a child, a son or daughter of God, made in the image of God, you have an eternal soul. These are not simple things. And our personalities and our ideas and beliefs come from so many complex experiences. So when you fall back on something like environmental determinism, or you know, if you look at economic fields of large template economic models of this model is, let's do development, for example, the United States or Germany or Japan or whatever. This is how they developed. This is the good model of development. And this is how all countries and all people and all places should develop in these 5 steps. Like, these are step 1, you do this to be a civilization. Step 2, you do this. Step 3, step 4. And when you start creating these large blanket templates, you're oversimplifying things, and oftentimes you create a lot more problems and conflicts than existed prior.
Yeah, and you're making value judgments. In this case, inappropriate value judgments. You're deciding that skyscrapers are a goal.
Yeah, and you ascribe right and wrong to certain things, and I think that it can be very problematic.
Mm-hmm. So, we talked just now about the influences that land features, that geography can have on a society or culture. But what about the impact that human beings have on the geography around them? I saw that some of your academic work focused, there was a focus on space, but in particular on sacred space, and separately from that, the creation of space, of spaces. So maybe you could unfold that a little bit for us.
Yeah, and I think before I do, I want to quickly define two terms. One is place. When we use the word place in geography, we're really talking about meaning behind things. That you have a space, and not outer space, not the planets or constellations, but physical, empty space, kind of just the invisible environment that we fill with things. If you were to look around your room, you would see books behind, you on a bookshelf. We have books on our desks. We have maybe pictures on the wall. We have a bed in your bedroom, a dresser. And these are things that we fill space with. And as we do that, knowingly or not, we create place. We create a sense of meaning within this space. The home is an example. What home means to me is going to be very different than what home means to you. And that's based off of our experiences, our feelings. How did our parents treat us in the home? What was my relationship like with my siblings? Did my doors close? Did I have doors on my home? Did I have things to fill it with? Did I sit and play, Xbox and PlayStation all day? All of these things are going to create our sense of home, the concept of home, a meaning to it. Now, when it comes to space, we have this almost like this empty void that we fill things with. And the way that we fill space and create space is in many different ways. So to answer your question, I did done a lot of research in the creation of sacred space, in particular, to see what is it about. And we use that word sacred often. Like, this is a sacred place. Maybe the church is a sacred place. Maybe this outdoor mountain is a sacred place. We hear this often. But what makes a place sacred? What creates space? Because we're always creating place, whether we know it or not. So the creation of sacred space or sacred place was a big thing that I had studied. And it's complex. So I don't know how in depth you would want me to get. So I'm gonna pause there before I answer your question to see if you have any follow-ups.
No, I would like to maybe kind of connect, and this might go a little outside of your wheelhouse, but I'd like to connect some of what you're saying to architecture, for example.
Oh, yeah.
We talk about like a created environment, not necessarily a mountain, a church. I mean, this, again, testifying to the interdisciplinary nature of geography. What about architecture?
No, that's great. And again, going back to geography, we read geographers, but we also read from plenty of other places. And so in a lot of my research, I did pull directly from architecture. And architecture, when looking at the church, as an example, as everybody will most likely be familiar with the church, is what is the physical space, the architecture communicating? There is a theology, there is a worldview, there is an idea, there are beliefs being communicated through the architecture, through the actual setup, the arrangement of physical space. You might have a church where you have the choir sitting in the front. You might have a church where you have a choir loft and the choir is behind everybody up in a choir loft, or the organ is behind everybody and the music is coming from behind. Maybe those decisions were made for practical reasons, but probably not. There probably was some architect or some sort of designer intentionally arranging and creating the space in such a way to communicate something, to communicate a theology. Why does a pastor sit at the very front or stand at the very front of the service and the seating is arranged all the way around? Well, that's communicating something. There's a difference between if you see a pastor at the very front at a podium versus if you were to go in an old cathedral and you would see, the priest or the pastor up on a pedestal kind of off to the side. That these arrangements become very, very important aspects of communication. What do we believe as, in this example, a church? What is our theology? Where can you park? Where can't you park? Let's take down this lot and pave it to try to fit as many people as we can. All of these steps are being designed with some sort of intent behind them. And sometimes they're designed with an intent and then it communicates something different than was originally intended. So we don't always think of that, but architecture plays a huge role in the creation of space.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I love that your courses are going to contribute towards, I guess, the awareness of Kepler students, because one of the things is, as I'm raising my own children, that I'm trying to teach them is to be aware that everything has a message and everything has a purpose. And it's so easy for us to walk into a church, let's say we're in England or in New England, and the pulpit is raised and off to the side. Okay. Like, it would just be so easy to walk in and
Sure.
and not even consider why that might be. I mean, it'd be one thing to come up with a wrong idea for what that message was supposed to be, but it's so easy for us. And I think maybe particularly Americans, we can be a little oblivious to that sort of thing. And of course, when you're in your own environment, any human is that way. But we've sort of stripped meaning from so many areas that we can walk into a building and just not think about any of what it's doing. And it's interesting even just to see across cultures how they have different conceptions of space and how space ought to be built and how space ought to be managed.
And I love the term that you used, awareness. I think that is something that geography does beautifully, is that when we approach and we use these guiding questions of what is the relationship between these two things, how do we create space and place and meaning, it allows students and teachers alike to be aware of how complex the earth, the people really are, that there's not just a one type or a one way or a one reason why, that we kind of become aware to, wow, there are a lot of players and there are a lot of facets, and that this is an ongoing process. I recently saw, I can't remember if it was a meme or if it was just some Instagram photo, but it was like a future prediction of how the COVID crisis is going to influence architecture. And there was a couple mock-up drawings of an office building. And in the office building, there were these cubicles in which everybody was facing one direction, but they were kind of staggered and they had like clear glass around them, kind of just showing projections. And there's a restaurant near our house that over the past couple of weeks we've been going to, and every time we go in, there's a new change. Well, most recently, there's these massive plexiglass barriers between every single booth. And you kind of see this, and maybe this is a temporary thing. I don't know. I'm not predicting the future, but you can kind of see how something could be created as a necessary precaution. Is we're going to make an architectural design, change to our space. We're going to put up these barriers so that we can protect each other's health. Let's say it sticks, and 40 years down the road, we're still putting these barriers. What does that communicate about how humans interact? How should we interact? Should I talk to my neighbor? Should I engage? What does that do to a community and how we relate to one another as humans? So whether we intend for it or whether we want it or whether there was a design behind, something will be communicated. And I think being aware of that is very, very important.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. And I think it's fascinating for us to explore how we interact with space. I mean, when I was a kid, one of my favorite books was actually a sci-fi series. It was 3 books by Isaac Asimov, The Caves of Steel, and they were at their core just detective stories. Okay, so this gruff cop, and he's trying to solve a murder, but it happens in the future, and so he's from these this caves of steel, these domed, very tightly packed cities on Earth. But the second book happens in on a planet where people don't even see each other physically, where they have armies of robots to tend to their needs. They procreate artificially, and they interact with each other through holograms. And so obviously the author is contrasting these two environments.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely love flights of fancy through things like this, because it makes us in a sense confront ourselves and what our priorities are.
Yeah. Oh, it most definitely does. And that's what's beautiful about fiction, is it allows us to kind of play with these ideas and these issues, to say, what do we do in these certain types of situations? And there's kind of a string in geography of questions. If we were to use like geographic questions to guide us through, let's say, a synthesis or an interdisciplinary approach, what would be some of those questions? Well, one would be, where are things? That's kind of the basic, right? Memorize the map, memorize the state capitals. That's basically, in most geography curriculums, where things stop, is where is it? You're good, geography, now go to your next class. That's like debate, where are things? But then we need to say, where are things, and how are things arranged in those spaces? This could be in the church, this could be a whole country, this could be a city, this could be a neighborhood, this could be your bedroom, this could be your bookshelf. How are things arranged? So where is it? And then how are things arranged? And then we go to say, how does that arrangement, why are they there? Why did we arrange them in such a way? Why is that thing there, or those things, or that community there? What created them, or what process led to that? And then from there, we could say, well, what meaning then is placed? What meanings are behind those things? That would be kind of the next logical question, is, so what does that communicate? What's the meaning behind it? Because the way you see it and perceive it is going to be different than the way I see and perceive it. And from there, we can then ask, this is my favorite geography question. If there's ever any of my past students who have ever taken any classes with me, they'll know this question, but where, for whom, and to what purpose? Where, for whom, and to what purpose? That any time we need to ask or analyze or try to critique or evaluate something, we always need to ask that question. Where is it? For whom was it intended? Or what is the intent behind it? And for what purpose? And once we begin to answer those questions, we can then look at relationships and say, how do these things, two things then relate? We know why they're there. Now we can start to jump to an evaluation of, should they? Should this be the case? Okay, if this is the case, should it be? And then we can finally make the last step to say, now, what can I do about that? How can I play a role in the community? How can I engage? How can I be an advocate or a voice for those who don't have a voice, or salt and light? How can I then take a stance, given the where, the for whom, to what purpose, the whys, the meaning behind it all? Now, geography never wants to stop there, and always wants to say, okay, now what part do I play in this? Because it's not an abstract thing. We're talking about real people, real places, things that are connected to me.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting how geography, or sense of place, is something we can be oblivious to, precisely because it's so pervasive, right? Nobody notices the air that they're breathing. So we're walking around in this spatial environment, taking in all this stuff, interacting with it, making meaningful decisions based off of that, and often not even considering.
Don't even know.
How right? Yeah. No, we've brought up your cartography class often, but a lot of what we've been talking about here is your Life on Earth course, and of course you also have the People and Places of the World class. But as we approach the end of the stream, I'd absolutely love for you to kind of give us a thumbnail. Why should I take this class? And maybe we can start with Life on Earth, human environment relations. Why should I take this class?
Yeah, great question. So this Life on Earth class is what I would say is like a pre-geographic thought course. We're going to be really diving into and defining what is space, what is place, and kind of really engaging in those questions that I just mentioned, and kind of going through that process of where are things, what are the processes that create those things or arrange them, where do I fit in with it, and what can I do about it? And that's kind of the stream. And we're going to be looking at a lot of modern contemporary issues related to food. Where does our food come from? What is the food economy? How is food grown? Where does food come from? Who grows our food? Why do they grow it? We're going to be diving into economics. We're going to look at water. Where does water come from? We can look at issues and controversies related to dam construction. We're going to look at droughts. How does our relationship to food and water create and help create, because we don't want to fall into environmental determinism, but how do these things really play a key role in creating who we are and how we live in our life? Life is based off of food and water. We don't get food, we don't get water, we're dead. We're done.
Right.
So
the two texts. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the two texts in your class. One is called "Raining in the Rio Grande," and the other is just called "Food."
Yeah, yeah, and those are great examples of texts that we can have good geographic conversations about. We can look at the human aspect. We can look at the physical, the environmental geography. And we can kind of wrestle. We're going to be reading a lot of academic articles in the text. So if you look at the course descriptions, the reason why you probably don't see too many texts compared to other people is because those texts are mainly going to be in the form of academic articles or chapters from primary source documents in books. So the list would be like 40 or 50, things long that we're going to read a lot of different snippets of to try to get a nice, well-rounded, and then use texts like Food or Raining in the Rio Grande as kind of text that we can wrestle with a little deeper and look at. From Raining in the Rio Grande, a wonderful book that looks at the religious, the economic, the physical, the kind of all the different aspects, and we can have a broad conversation.
And what you just mentioned is a bit of a selling point for families that are watching. Most of the reading list is provided by your teacher.
Yes, that is my one goal is for you to try to buy as little as possible, is to try to have everything be free. There are a couple texts there, but by and large, I'm going to do my best to provide everything for all students.
Now, how about a thumbnail? Why should I take this course for people and places of the world?
People and places. People and places is probably most akin to your classic geography class. When you think of geography, I want to learn about cultures. I want to learn about other places of the world. What is living like? So we're going to do that. We're going to go to all 7 continents. I wish we could physically fly to all 7 continents. We can't, but we're going to do kind of an intellectual survey of all of the world as much as we can to try to look at and answer those same questions. Where are things? Why are they there? What are the processes? But then we're going to start to really dive into a multifaceted. So we're not just going to look at what is the history, who has ruled in this area. We will. But we're also going to look at what is the physical land like? What rivers are there? How do those rivers influence and impact the people who live there and why they live there? What is their economic status like? How does migration work in those parts of the world? What is the religious climate? How many people are there? Why is the population density like that in that location? How does their population density affect socioeconomic status? And we can kind of go on this, downward snowball effect of questions to really try to wrestle with why is the world the way it is? How does it work? How does it function? And what's my place in it? Because we oftentimes don't think that I'm somehow connected to Kazakhstan or that I'm somehow connected to Bolivia. Oh, wait, you mean there's your lithium mining in uranium and that the majority, lithium mining in Bolivia, and the majority of our lithium comes from Bolivia, and there's international trade agreements, and our battery, like you can't use batteries without Bolivia. Like these are things that we don't necessarily think about.
Right.
And what is our relationship at a large scale foreign policy stances to cultural exchanges to the list is endless and can go on and on. So that's what we're going to be doing, is really wrestling with, and probably in that class, asking far more questions than we will be answering.
which sounds like a good class to me.
Yeah.
that should be the tagline we put under it.
Yeah.
Asking far more questions than we're answering. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here talking geography, talking place. I'm really looking forward to the fall. And as we say goodbye, do stay on the line a little bit, and we can chat. But very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So long, everybody.